from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, February 21st, 2020. Here in the Big Easy, as they call it, this city is in an uproar from Mardi Gras coming. So it's a mess down here. Don't forget to pray for the brethren here as we do our program here. And also in the Sabbath service, everyone get back and forth to church on Saturday. A lot to talk about today, the coronavirus. It's actually been given a new official name. So you've probably been keeping up with it with the news. But what we want to do is we want to bring up the pace of its growth. Because the Bible talks about at the end time in the seals, the pestilences and how things are going to continue to grow. And I'm going to show you something today that if it had not been for shutting down some of the cities, there's no telling how far this would have gotten to by now. Then we're going to talk about the discerning of the times. We're going to pull in some of the information that I gave in a sermon last week, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes when we get into this segment. Tie in what we talked about last week here on News and Nuggets and continue to bring it into the 10 toes and the beast and the rise of the Holy Roman Revival that's talked about in the book of Revelation. Then we're going to talk about the reconstituted beast of Daniel. So we'll take all that news, we're going to pull it together into our nuggets portion of the program and begin expanding on the beast that you've seen in Daniel to try to bring it into modern times that we can understand today. But let's get into something first. Good news. Finally got some good news. Hamilton, Texas. The Hamilton County installs the 10 Commandments Monument. Now, I remember doing our program for a long time, and it was always tearing everything down. This is the first time I've seen something actually going back up. This is in Texas. 7 foot high, 8,000 pounds, and we actually have a little video report from a news program in Texas. Let's play that news report, and I'll be back.
All new tonight, Hamilton County is home to the newest 10 Commandments monument in the state of Texas. As 25 News reporter Dennis Turner shows us, some of the same principles embodied in the commandments made the monument possible.
Back in the summer, a Hamilton County man proposed a 10 Commandments monument for the county. He wanted to put it at the county courthouse. It ended up a few miles down the road.
I'm extremely excited.
Johnny Klepper beamed like a proud papa as he helped install what he hopes will become a lasting legacy. He originally proposed a 10 Commandments monument for the Hamilton courthouse, but settled on donated land next to the sheriff's department to end community debate over the separation of church and state. He hopes these enduring rules to live by send a message.
I hope it changed some people's hearts, changed some people's lives.
The more than 7 foot tall tablets definitely make a statement. This monument weighs 8,000 pounds. That's 8,000 pounds of mountain red granite. From Texas, of course. Waco artist Rolando Sanz chipped away at it more than 2 months.
Most of it was hammer and chisel work. Just hammer, swinging the hammer and chisel to shape it the way it is.
Thursday, he and a friend loaded it onto a truck and drove it to Hamilton, where folks anxiously waited in the cold to see it. And as these men carefully unloaded this work of art, Commandments on the front and Mount Sinai on the back, they thought about what message they wanted it to send.
If we can find some kindness in our heart, that's the most important thing.
And in this town, kindness goes a long way.
I think it's the best town in the world. Everybody works together. Maybe I believe politics a little bit different, but we care about each other and we love each other and we come to help each other when there's need.
Will this become Hamilton County's latest tourist attraction? Mr. Sands and Mr. Klepper say they hope so. In Hamilton County, Dennis Turner, 25 News.
And Rolando is very talented. Klepper plans to add flags and solar lighting by the weekend.
We'll keep you posted on what's going on there. It'll be interesting to see how soon it is before they begin having protests to take these 10 Commandments down. And as a side note, just a little side note, I thought it was quite interesting. The gentleman who was doing the story on it is there in the middle of the night, pitch black around him, and he's coming around from behind the monuments like he's expecting something to happen. Just a little side note, thought I'd throw that in. All righty, to the next segment. This is becoming very popular on News Nuggets and Insights. Now, it's going to be tough to top last week. The gentleman who robbed a bank so he can go to jail so he wouldn't have to be home with his wife, who was sentenced to house arrest. It's going to be hard to top that one. But we got a couple here, and this is the toilet paper caper. How could you forget the toilet paper caper? All right, 3 men stole 600 rolls of toilet paper in Hong Kong amid the fears of coronavirus shortages. Among all the stuff that you could be worried about, toilet paper is right there at the top of the list for these 3 guys. Police in Hong Kong have arrested 2 men and are searching for a third after the group stole about 600 toilet paper rolls in the robbery likely sparked by coronavirus fears that has gripped the city. Well, there you have it. So when you leave and you're preparing to go, you got food, you got water. Let's not forget the horrible toilet paper caper. And remember that next time you have to escape. Can't make that up. Here's another one. How about Greta Thunberg? Remember her? She's back in the news again, and you're not going to believe this because you can't make it up. She's going to get her own reality show now. Well, isn't that amazing? She's going to get her own reality show. Teen climate activist Greta Thunberg will emphasize reality of climate change in her own BBC docu-series. So now she's going to be promoted by the polluters. Can't make it up. The polluters who are ruining our world, she's going to be promoted by them to talk about how bad it is to be like them. That's true. Can't make it up. But that's coming. No telling what's going to come up next in that arena. All right, let's get to some serious news. The COVID-19 is the new name. This the new coronavirus disease now officially has a name, the COVID-19, and a global pandemic coming. What's going on here? We've been covering it now for a few weeks, and you've been probably watching a lot of this on the news pretty much on a daily basis. And you can see how as soon as they find this, they've been isolating as fast as they can, because this virus spreads a lot faster than they ever dreamed it would, and a lot faster than SARS. SARS has a rating of death to illness of a 1, and 1 is like the contact of you 101 or 102. Whereas the coronavirus has a 2.2 or 2.3. So more than twice as many people die from this virus as the other. And it spreads much, much faster. So we've been kind of keeping up on a week-by-week basis. We started just a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. In our first report, we talked about there were 107. This is let me put up here is like, when I first did this on a preparation on a Monday, they had 89 people. Then by Tuesday morning, they reported 107 people had died, and 4,600 were affected. Well, by that Sunday, a week later, it was 14,000 affected and 305 died. So we went through it last week and the week each week, and so it gets a little messy. So it gets a little messy if you keep going over everything. So what I did is I just simply took that and I just erased it all away. And what I'm doing today, just so we can keep track of what's going on here, is this was Monday morning, February 10th, a week ago, all right, a week ago. 946 deaths, 40,649 confirmed cases. Then on Tuesday morning, which is we tape on Tuesday morning, that would be this today, 1 week ago, it broke the 1,000 mark with 42,000 people. So it's been averaging over 2,000 affected cases a day. And until today, it was the first night that they had less than 2,000 reported. And I don't know that we can believe any of that, to be honest with you, what's going on over in China, as we reported last week. Now, yesterday, you can see from the previous Monday, if you look straight up top, yesterday the deaths had risen to 1,770 deaths, 70,000 people affected. So you can see it's expanding more rapidly as things are going. And this, with entire cities kind of being shut down. Ports of entry and exit being shut down, airplane flights, shipping shut down. And it's still growing. And on one of the ships that we reported this morning, there was like 400 or 500 people that they fear now might be affected in their quarantine. Then this morning, it went to 1,868 deaths and 72,000 cases. So if you look at yesterday to this morning, they were all raving that it didn't hit 2,000. Well, it's pretty close. It's really pretty close, 1,900 new cases reported. And that's if they're reporting everything. So anyway, we're just trying to keep an eye on this. And I think what's going to tell us down the road, when we get into the book of Revelation and God pulls the plug and you look at the seals, how fast things can move, there's no telling what's going to happen by that time. But this gives us an idea of what to look for. Now, what we don't have yet, and you're going to begin to find, you're going to find it through the stock market. If you want to know what's going on, you follow the money. Is the cost of all of this, short-term and long-term, because this is going to affect a lot of countries, a lot of business, and a lot of farmers. And people are already in China, they're hungry. There's shortages, there's looting, there's robbery, they're injuring people to get food, risking life and limb so that they can eat. So it just gives you an idea. And this is in a confined, controlled environment. Wait till things get out of control. So this ought to give us an idea of a wake-up call, exactly what's going on. Now they've deployed mini tanks, as they call them. I got a picture up there, as you can see it. These little mini tanks to disinfect even the streets and all the air where it's at, to try to hopefully make more living, the inhabitant okay, to keep it safe and healthy. The authorities in China have resorted to using remote control operated mini tanks to disinfect the streets amid the deadly coronavirus. The tank, which was deployed by the Shanix Tianyi Technology Company Limited, was originally designed to disinfect prisons and can cover up to 540,000 square feet in just an hour. So they're going through the city now and just spraying everything they can spray to try to remove this virus, so to keep it from spreading. So they're working at it and they're trying, so we'll see how things go. All right, this is an important story here. This story we just started covering just a couple of weeks ago, and this is a story that we're going to cover for a while in different aspects, different segments, because it covers a lot of what's going on in the time that we live today. And so we'll be pulling in history, we're pulling in the Bible, we're pulling in the book of Daniel, pulling in Revelation, and current events. This segment, we're calling it Discerning the Times that we live in. This is referring to where Jesus talks about in the book of Luke, chapter 12, speaking to the Pharisees. He says, when you see a cloud rise out of the west, which was the basis for the sermon that I delivered last Saturday right here, that you'll be getting in the mail, in a newsletter, in a card at the end of the month, so that you can follow what we're talking about here. So what I'm going to do today, if you saw that sermon, we pull in pieces of that with pieces of last week's news nuggets and insights, and then we're going to build. We're actually going to build on it to bring in the book of Daniel to the book of Revelation in the times in which we live today. All right, Discerning the Times, Jesus speaking to the Pharisees, is found in the book of Luke, chapter 12. Sorry about that. So, okay. All right, this Discerning the Times, where Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, is found in the book of Luke, chapter 12, verse 54. He said also to the people that when you see a cloud rising out of the west, straightway you say, there comes a shower, and so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, there will be heat, and it comes to pass. He says, you hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it that you cannot discern this time? And so it is with the times we live today. The people today, the environment in many of the churches, if not most of all the churches, especially the Catholic Church, has no idea of the discerning of the times we live today. If I went out to the street and I just thought it's a Joe Blow person walking up and down the street, and I said, do you think you're living in the end days or Christ can come back very soon? On occasion, you'll have somebody, if they go to church, say, yeah, oh yeah, we got to be living close to the end time. But if you said, well, you think it's possible in the next 10, 15 years Christ will be coming back, and they'll absolutely don't believe it. Then they don't live that way as if Christ is actually going to be coming back. And herein lies the problem. They know that at some point in time, Christ is going to come back, but it's like it's not going to happen in our lifetime because it's not happening our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. So it's not going to happen in our lifetime. Try to teach your children. The children, even if they're grown up in our church, in the church culture, they can't comprehend what's going on today to actually make it real. So people who don't believe these things can happen, they don't live like it's going to happen. And not only that, most of the people on the street, they don't really go to church. There's more atheists today than we've ever had in modern times. So now, let's pick up the time of what Jesus Christ is talking about, and we're going to pull in a piece of history now. Abraham Lincoln, All right, so we're going to talk about Abraham Lincoln pulling this together to tie into today. Lincoln possessed a quick intuition of human nature or discernment and of the strength and the weakness of individual character. So if you studied history, you would see that Lincoln was basically raised by Christian teachers in the Midwest. So now, before he was elected, right, this is all documented in history. Before he was elected president, he spoke of removing slavery and the ominous clouds of a civil war that would take place to do it. He knew to get this accomplished, there'd be a civil war. That the South would never do it. It couldn't even get accomplished when we began the United States in 1776. Even as early as that, people would not bend to the fact that even though we wrote it, all men are created equal, it never made it into the Constitution about slavery. So he knew what he was up against. And he wrote about the ominous clouds that were coming, or he talked about they were on the horizon. But then he said, after he was elected, he talked about something totally different, which is more important for our time today. He says, after being elected president, after the Civil War had already begun, that Lincoln spoke of another very dark cloud on the horizon. So when I was starting to work on my sermon about the cloud on the horizon, I had remembered in my studies that Abraham Lincoln had talked about the cloud on the horizon. So I wanted to go back into history and find out what he said. And I actually found these two. This one I understood and remembered. This one was new to me. I had no recollection of it. Don't even remember him even talking about this. But the truth is, it's all over the internet when you go looking in history. This is what he said. I see a very dark cloud on the horizon, on our horizon, and that dark cloud is coming from Rome. Now that caught my attention because we understand the beast power, and this church has always taught that the beast power would come out of a 10-nation group, would be the Holy Roman Revival being led by the Catholic Church. And where is that church? It's in Rome. Now you'd be surprised how many churches actually understand that this beast power is talking about the Catholic Church, even though they don't preach it, because they get cut off the airways when they do, in most cases. So now he's talking about a very dark cloud that's coming from Rome, but he's talking about at his time that this was all taking place. And I said, well, this is quite interesting. So I actually went into looking at what he was talking about. And to my surprise, we had been covering a lot of this information through not only God's Unchanging Word, but through our church, the Church of God Ministries International. And we had done specials that seemed to evolve around the Rome and the problems developing in the duality of Abraham Lincoln in the time we live today. So as with Abraham Lincoln, America now has moved into a civil war. Never have we been a time in modern days that is more polarized than we are today. Our civil war today, though, is a spiritual civil war. But we can look at the roots of what he dealt with from the physical point of view to bring in today the spiritual point of view for what we're looking at today. So when he said that, he says this was when he made that statement. I do not pretend to be a prophet, but though not a prophet, I see a very dark cloud on the horizon, and that dark cloud is coming from Rome. Now, what I'm going to do today is, you may have seen this a few years ago. This is almost 5 years old that we gave this. This is when the Pope had came to America, and he came in on the Day of Atonement, and actually went on the Day of Atonement, the most sacred day of God's calendar of any year, and actually went into the White House and went and sat with the President of the United States on the Day of Atonement, which began the series. He went from there to the Senate and the House, and then he went from there to the UN, and then to Philadelphia. So basically what he was doing is marking his territory. And what I believed, and we taught back then, is that God was showing us that he had washed his hands, that America had chosen to move away from Scripture and adopted the marriage between man and woman, and now it's going beyond that to, you name it, you can just do anything you want to do now. And so we talked about that. So as the world was anticipating for a collapse, as many of the preachers and prophets were trying to say back then, We were showing at that particular time that that wasn't the issue. What was coming is what Abraham Lincoln talked about from the physical. We saw from the spiritual that there was a dark cloud coming, and it was coming from Rome. So we're going to play that intro. It's about 5 minutes long. Take a look, and I'll be back. As the fall of 2015 approaches, millions are holding their breath to see what will unfold with the conclusion of the Shemitah 2015. The last 2 times this event occurred, it nearly brought America to a collapse. Despite what many claim that we have recovered, we have not, nor has the rest of the world. Since that time, debt in America has risen over $8 trillion with no end in sight. Global debt now stands over $200 trillion. Christianity is under siege around the globe. Tens of thousands have been persecuted and killed. Entire cities have been burned and destroyed. As I was preparing to deliver the second part of this warning message and describing how America has been accelerating its removal of God, no sooner had I begun that everything suddenly changed. As I was preparing, the unthinkable happened.
Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage across the land, and it's profound. The 5-4 vote, in many ways reflecting the huge societal shift of the last 20 years.
Lester, good evening. It's the most important gay rights ruling ever, and it's the culmination of decades of legal battles. A huge cheer, then singing as the decision reaches the crowd out front. The historic ruling struck down the bans on same.
Has America pronounced its own death sentence? Or are we witnessing the handwriting on the wall? In America, just days following the Supreme Court's ruling on gay marriage, the ACLU states that they will no longer defend Christians' rights. Will the pulpit be the next to go? Meanwhile, the internet pages are filled with predictions of rapture, date setting, and tribulation. Never in modern times have we seen so many alarming conditions all merging at the same time.
But the interesting thing is, like, you have all these reports, people saying, oh, it's going to go higher and higher, and then they're saying all the danger signs that were there at the last crash are there now.
2007, the conditions that the United States was in, we are right back 7 years later into those same conditions today, except we're in worse shape.
And all I'm doing is combining science, history, and the scriptures to say this is the pattern. This is what has happened in the past. Could it happen this year? That's what we'll have to watch, is going back to a hurricane. There's watches and warnings. I wanted to give everyone a watch that we need to be watching, looking up, because it could turn into a warning.
Now, with all these things converging, the tower converging, the tower looks like it will be completed, all these things in America rapidly turning away from God, I mean, at an accelerating pace, the harbingers continuing, you have the tree of hope dead, and all these things taking place, and the peak of the Shemitah, which is when generally things happen, if it goes according to this pattern, will be in September 2015. Now again, my two cautions, nothing has to happen, God doesn't have to do anything. However, I'd be ready, I'd be aware, it could.
We need to be prepared. But what if nothing happens this Shemitah? No global financial crisis, no world falling apart. What if nothing happens and things go on as usual? Does it mean nothing has happened? Will everything go back to what it was? God uses calamities to get our attention. a way of warning that something is coming. Change usually comes quietly, normally without most ever knowing it took place. While we prepare for the worst that could happen this September, this program will focus on a quiet change that is beginning to take place this September that the world is totally unaware. That was 5 years ago. So as you can see, the rest of the world was looking to a global collapse just like in 2008. And at that time, Jonathan Cahn, who actually you saw in our program, and Mark Biltz, they were talking about some of the concerns, the Shemitah, the blood moons, and all those things that were actually taking place then. When we understood basically what God was doing, you look at prophecy and the guidance that God gives, we understood that the problem wasn't going to be the end at that time. It would be the beginning. And because of that, we began to work on the out of the mouth of two witnesses and then the handwriting on the wall. And we brought in the series on the Holy Roman Revival. And as we look now, and after 5 years, we've got online through a timeline series that God's been giving us for over 5 years, over 50 hours of Bible study information. I encourage you, go to our website. Take a look at the website. Go to where the link is. Bring you to it. And use this as a Bible study tool to understand the progression of how things have changed to where God's taken us to warn us of what's going to come in 2030 with the Pope at the helm. It goes all the way back to the out of the mouth of two witnesses and the handwriting on the wall. And view them in order. Take your time. Go through each and every one. You've got a year worth of information, but God's study says we're supposed to study every day anyway to show ourselves approved. Use this information to familiarize yourself with what the Bible literally teaches and what the current events are actually doing. That's where it brought us to now with Abraham Lincoln. And that's why we're hitting now on this, is that we've got a timeline, we've got a template. We kind of understand that within the periods of the prophecies and prophetic guidelines of what God gives us, is that now we need to see how do we prepare what's taking place. And God has for us, just like he did for the children in the New Testament, given us an example of duality of events of how things happen so that we're never caught unaware of what's going on. Abraham Lincoln, the real engine behind the Civil War. This may shock a lot of people. As it is with Southern leaders of this Civil War, as with the big and small wheels of our railroad cars, that those who ignore the laws of mechanics are apt to think that the large, strong, and the noisy wheels they see on the motive power, but they are mistaken. It's the motive and the power is not the wheels that drive it. It's what's not seen is what Abraham Lincoln is talking about. The real motive power is not seen. It is noiseless, well concealed in the dark behind its iron walls. The motive power are the very well concealed pails of water heated into steam, which is itself directed by a noiseless, small, but unerring engineer's finger. So now when you get to understand what he's talking about, the power behind that locomotive, just like the power of the beast, it isn't all the noise that we're looking at, the politics, the green, and all these things. It's behind those iron walls and that one man with his finger driving it all, which eventually you'll see he's talking about is the Pope. Going on. The common people, he says, see and hear the big, noisy wheels of the Southern Confederacy's cars. They call Jeff Davis, Lee, Toombs, Beauregard, Sims, and etc., and they honestly think that they are the motive power, the first cause of our troubles. But this is a mistake. The true motive power is secreted behind the thick walls of the Vatican. The iron walls. He said, this is the real problem. These guys are not the problem. They're being driven by that one man with the finger telling them what to do. The true motive is hidden behind thick walls of the Vatican, the colleges and the schools and the Jesuits, the convents, the nuns, and the confessional boxes of Rome. He said, here's the real problem, right there. And when you think about it, this is what the Bible says. You train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And I know growing up in my neighborhood, I lived in a Catholic neighborhood growing up. New Orleans is a Catholic town, one of the biggest in America, one of the most powerful Catholic towns in America. The children I grew up with, most were Catholics. And today, you talk to Catholics, they'll say, I was born a Catholic, I'll die a Catholic. That's it. They're not thinking any other way. So whatever the Pope says, that's good enough for them. Because that's what they're taught for a child, is that the Pope's words overrides Scripture, because he's the emissary of Christ on the earth. In fact, he speaks on Christ's behalf. Now, we're going to talk about some of the noisy engines of what's going on, and talk about taxing the wealthy. And also, since 1962, from generation after generation, we have removed God from our schools and turned our children over to be taught by the godless. Just like he talks about, as you'll see with the Catholic Church. I don't have it all here, so I'm going to invite you to get this sermon when we offer it coming out, Cloud on the Horizon, showing how what's going on right now is exact duality in the spiritual of what was taking place that Abraham Lincoln saw in the physical. He goes on to say, there is a fact which is too much ignored by the American people, with which I am acquainted only since I became president. It's amazing he wrote that, because he didn't realize what he was up against until after he became president, of how deep the problem of the Civil War really was. He said, only since I became president, it is that the best, the leading families of the South, they have received their education in part, if not in whole, from the Jesuits and the nuns. Hence those degrading principles of slavery, pride, cruelty, which are a second nature among so many of those people. Hence the strange want of fair play, humanity, that implacable hatred against the ideas of equality and liberty as we find them in the gospel of Christ. And what he's saying is, like, the gospel of Christ, and when you see what's being taught by the Jesuits and the nuns, that they're different. It's not the same. And as I grew up in that neighborhood, the friends of mine, they talked about the nuns, how he talked about mean. They said, those ladies are mean, they call them. And they said they crack their knuckles, they make them kneel in rice. They drag them and pull them around by their hair when they were disobedience. They were mean. And I remember hearing all those stories. In fact, when you look in history, the Jesuits were so mean that countries finally pulled together to evict them from the country itself, the Jesuits. So we're in that spiritual civil war. Now, I go into a lot more detail in the sermon on that particular aspect. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks, you'll get your card, mail it in, or just write in now. Say, put me on the list for the cloud, and we'll do so. All right, the spiritual civil war that we're up against, most people think the problem today is politics, the Democrats and the Republicans. But I'm telling you, like Abraham Lincoln saying, if that's what you believe, then you're mistaken. Because that's not the issue. That's the fruits of the issue. Because the Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers, the rulers of the darkness, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So you need to say, who is running that? Who's manipulating all of this? So when you look at, you see the spiritual civil war, the push against socialism, and then on the other side is the push for socialism to support the movement of the Pope and the Green New Deal. All of that ties in together. So what we're looking at right now, basically, is a civil war taking place. Now, for those who don't know, Tony Perkins, all right, let me tell you a little bit about this and get you a little better feel of what I'm talking about. Tony Perkins says that Trump is dismantling the left's anti-faith agenda. All right, the president and the Family Research Council and Pastor Tony Perkins believes that President Trump is the man for his time because of his fight for religious freedom. Now, keep that term, a man for his time, because I'm going to show you another clip that we played Saturday. I'm going to play it again today, that Governor Huckabee was talking about Abraham Lincoln, who understood that he was the man for his time. Just like you and I. We need to understand something, that God has called you and I as his people chosen for this time. In other words, just like Abraham Lincoln, you and I have a special purpose. God says, if not for the elect, you and I, no flesh would be saved. And so we look in Isaiah, it said, God says, if he had not saved a very small remnant, all right, talking about the end time. So you and I need to understand something. We don't just go to church on Sabbath. It's not an idea just to get together to fellowship. You and I have been called for a special mission, a purpose. Just like Abraham Lincoln understood, he was called for a special purpose to do the job he had, and he embraced it and put his life on the line, and eventually was called upon to give it. You and I need to understand that parallel, because that's where you and I are today. Right? He said this, the president has not only ceased the war on the people of faith, talking about Donald Trump, he's also building a bulwark where people of faith can openly practice their faith, he said. Just like I brought up with that 10 Commandments, that monument. How many times did we, on this program, talk about the removing of statues of God, the 10 Commandments, just taking them out of society? For this is the first time in years that I've seen actually one going back up. Amazing what's going on here. So you see a spiritual civil war taking place. So he said what he's doing is makes the left so mad is that he's dismantling their infrastructure that they use to advance their anti-faith. All right, that's what we're talking about here. The big government agenda, they're not going to be able to jump back into the driver's seat and take off again, he said. It's going to take them decades to rebuild. Now, I put that in there, but I don't believe that. I believe it's going to be turned around just like that. The power that Satan has, just like these viruses that's been taking place around the world, this evil is going to come like you have never seen it before. All right, so let's take a break and take a look at this video in light of what I said, that Abraham Lincoln believed he was a man for his time. Let's play that, and I'll be right back.
No one can read Lincoln's writings and miss the fact that he was a man who clearly believed that he was president for such a time as this. He understood that there was something more going on than the politics of the day, that he had a purpose that was bigger than himself, and it was to save the Union, and it was to bring freedom and liberty and also equality to people who had been enslaved. But it was based on Scripture. It was based on his understanding of what the Bible taught him, the difference between right and wrong. I think one of the most amazing things is to go to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, read the inscriptions. You know, the most powerful things he said in the second inaugural address, or just the great quotes that Lincoln had. You cannot read those and say, well, we're just a secular nation, and there is no room in our country for a discussion of God. Well, there's always been up until recent days, and Lincoln believed that God was directing him to lead the country, to make a clear moral statement about slavery. It was not a political statement, a moral statement, and he never backed away from it.
Perhaps the most famous prayer proclamation in history, in American history, is this one. This is Abraham Lincoln calling for a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer. And in it, he is just God conscious. He says, we've been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We've been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We've grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown, but we've forgotten God. We've forgotten the gracious hand that preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. We vainly imagine in the deceitfulness of our hearts that these blessings were produced by our own superior wisdom and virtue. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we've become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness. And after that, the Union only lost 2 more battles. Before that, they only won 2 battles.
Approximately 25 years earlier, before he became the President of the United States, in an address that is called the Lyceum Address, he warned that if this nation would ever fall, it would have to come from within.
At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined with all the treasure of the earth in their military chests, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide.
Abraham Lincoln understood that God had protected this nation on all sides, that if we were going to be destroyed, it would actually come from within. I remembered that address when I was a teenager, when our parents took us down to Disney World. It was called the Hall of the Presidents. And in the Hall of the Presidents, when you're young and all that technology was so advanced back then, and Abraham Lincoln stands up, and they had him actually reciting that address. And it stayed with me all my life. And so when we were making this special, it was felt so appropriate in the time we live today that that was prophetic, and that is actually coming to pass today. So today, just like in the days of Abraham Lincoln, we too see a very dark cloud on our horizon, and that dark cloud again is coming from Rome. In his most recent edict, as I call it, he was talking about the cuts for the wealthy. He said, if you do that, that constitutes, that structure was a sin. And it's a shameful thing. So he's asking everyone, he says, I ask you to ensure that humanity is served by wealth, but not ruled by it. That's amazing coming from the Vatican, the wealthiest little country on the face of the earth. Pope Francis said on Wednesday in a passionate address, calling for international wealth redistribution. That's what the Jesuits believed in back in the 1400s, 1500s, and they would come in and wreck nations, take over their educational system, take the riches of that nation and bring it all back to Rome. Until eventually many countries eventually had them removed from their country itself. Today, the Pope is at it again. He's creating a socialist world. So when we look at the politics of the land we live in today, and you're seeing the noisy engines of a Republican and a Democrat, that's not what's driving the issue. It's behind the scenes. The Bible calls it a beast power. We know it as the beast of Revelation in chapters 13 and chapter 17. We talked about it last year in one of those 50 hours of prophetic insight. In that timeline, we talked about this is where this comes from. The re-education process for global dominance begins May 14th, on the very day that God reestablished the modern-day Israel today that we live in on May 14th, 1948. The Pope now is going to begin a new revival of the Holy Roman Empire, and he kicks it off with a speech for the 2030 agenda with the new educating the new world to be able to be green friendly for humanism, removing God, and he will lead this world into what he believes is going to be a utopian experience. All right, so when we come back now, we're going to take all that information. Now let's put it to Scripture to see what the Bible says about the beast. So now we're going to begin talking about the reconstituted beast, plural, of Daniel. So when we come back, we'll get into that. So let's take a break. It's only about a minute or so long. Living waters, or living water, and I'll be right back. Welcome back. All right, now let's get into our actual nuggets portion of all the historical information we would talk about today. This is the reconstituted beast of Daniel. So now we're going to do a quick review of what we talked about in the past, pulling in Daniel chapters 2 to chapter 7, and we're going to pull them in to begin to lay the foundation for revelation in what God's talking about there. As we went through last week, God showed us that this was a history of the timeline from the time that Daniel was in with Nebuchadnezzar in the head of gold all the way through to the iron and the feet of clay and iron and those 10 toes, which is what the church has been teaching for decades about the 10 nations that would be in existence just before the return of Jesus Christ. Daniel 2 gives us the description of the kingdoms. Chapter 2, verse 20-21, Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." Because it was Daniel who was given the understanding of what Nebuchadnezzar was looking for. He said that he changes the times and the season, he removes kings, and he sets up kings. People don't understand today is that God tells us in the New Testament we have to respect the powers that be. No, you don't respect the disobedience to God's word. Sometimes you got to make a stand. But you have to understand that God sets powers up and he removes powers. So I was recently asking the question to a couple people with Donald Trump because he's a polarized person. The people, they love him and they hate him. It's unbelievable how drastic that has become. So when I thought about it, I remember the story they asked Christ when they brought him up, what has he done? Well, they couldn't find anything he did. So I asked the question and said, now, when Donald Trump was at the top of that escalator, I remember when he first came down, everybody talks about the change coming down the escalator, right? When he was at the top of the escalator, he was one of the most beloved TV personalities of his time. Everybody wanted to be with him. They all wanted to be a part of him. They wanted to be on his shows. I mean, everybody just loved him. But when he took that trip down that escalator and got to the bottom, before he did anything, he was now the most hated person. Now, think about that, because that's exactly what happened. He hadn't done anything yet. From love to hated, what happened? Satan understood that God would be moving in a protection, as that gentleman Tony Perkins said, to protect the Christian right, because in God's time plan, in that time framework that we put out in over 50 hours of information, that God has a plan, that if God didn't slow down the persecution of what was coming in this nation and was going on around the world, then there would be no way to get to the time frame that God's looking for. So he put a person in to stop what was going on. You can see that with Abraham Lincoln. That when Abraham Lincoln, when he began to be the power behind the Civil War, all of a sudden he became a hated person at the particular time. And he overcome the obstacles and he actually did what he was called upon to do. Same way with World War II. Satan knows God's plan when he does it. He's always around God. When Moses was born, what did Satan do? Tried to kill all the male babies, right? When Jesus was born, he killed all the babies from 2 years old. So Satan knows when God's about to do something. What was God about to do before World War II? Reestablish the modern day nation of Israel. So what did Satan do? He took and he began to crucify, to kill all the Jews who was going to go back into Jerusalem and set up a modern day Israel, because that was part of the prophetic plan. So when God's about to do something, Satan's there, he knows it, he tries to stop it. And that's what's going on today. Because see, God's got a plan for you and I. Because we are just like Governor Huckabee said of Abraham Lincoln, who believed he was a man for the time. You need to understand that if you're called in this time, you're the person for this time because God has given it to you to be a part of. All right, so with all that said, let's go on. All right, chapter 7 in Daniel. And after Daniel takes the same dream, now it takes those kingdoms and it gives them figures as animals or types of their power and their strength. The image is described in Daniel 2, is repeated in Daniel 7 in the form of animals to describe the different kingdoms. What are we describing? God uses the animals, which I'm going to show you in just a second, to show you the type of power they had. Like you have a leopard or cheetahs, they fast. And that's like Alexander the Great. He was very fast as he moved across. So in Daniel 7, it says the first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings, right? So there you have the first beast. That's the head of gold. I'm putting them side by side so we can put them together. People get confused thinking this is all different, but it's not. It's telling the same story in different fashions, pulling the pieces together. That's what God's doing in Daniel chapter 7. All right, the second one. Behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, raised itself upon one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth and between his teeth. And he said, rise and devour much flesh. All right, that is the power, the size, and the might of the Persian Empire. All right, so they're very likened unto a bear. The next one, the third. All right, and the third is a leopard. All right, so you see the leopard, it had 4 wings like a fowl, and it had the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So as you go through history, you understand that this was like Alexander the Great. And when he died, it was broken into, had 4 generals, and the empire was broken into 4 different powers. So you see that reflected in that animal with the swiftness of the leopard. And the last one now the last one's different. Now the last one you got a problem because it never goes away till Christ comes back. And this is what Daniel's trying to say. In verse 7 of Daniel 7, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke into pieces and stamped the residue with its feet and with its diverse from all the other beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Now, all of those things, the 10 horns and all the information, we're going to begin covering in the future programs for News Nuggets and Insights. So you want to catch this every week as we go through this. So now, let's put all this together now. Let's take what Daniel saw, because it's reflecting from the time of Daniel all the way out, and we showed that last week, till the time of Jesus Christ comes back to set his kingdom up. Revelation takes us to now how it's set up just before his return. So I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon its horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was likened to a leopard, and his feet there was the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat, and he had great authority. So now what we're looking at the beast, and I got these highlighted in the yellow, yours might be orange on your screen, is that what you're looking at was those beasts we just showed you in Daniel 7. So the beast in Revelation 13 is the reconstituted beast with all the powers of the beast shown in Revelation chapter 7. So now let's go back and let's pick that up again, show you how that works. So by the time of John's vision, Rome had swallowed up all the previous empires. Babylon was gone, Persia was gone, and Greece was gone. All we have is Rome. So when we look at the prophecy in Daniel 2, it says by the time all these nations go through, all the way down to the feet, the iron, and the toes, it's the stone, which is Jesus Christ. It conquers the 10 toes. It hits the toes and everything's gone. That's all the way to the end, just before the return of Jesus Christ. So what Rome has, it has all the strength of all of those nations that came before it. John's beast encompassed the most powerful features of the preceding 3 great empires that had fallen. All right, so the beast which I saw was likened to a leopard. So the majority of the size of the beast, its body and everything was like the leopard. So that's what we're looking at. It had the feet of a bear in his mouth. It had the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power. So who is the dragon? We know the dragon is that of Satan. All right, that's the power of Satan. And a seat with great authority. Who sits on this earth replacing Jesus Christ, who has the seat of authority? The Pope. That's the only one on the face of the earth that has and ever proclaimed to have that type of power on the face of the earth. So let's take a look at this. So he said the beast was like that of a leopard. So what I did is I got the circle around the beast with the leopard. You see the leopard is actually the 3rd beast, showing over here the leopard. All right, he was likened to a leopard, so that we have that part of the beast in this drawing. It had the swiftness and the cunning and the cruelty of Alexander the Great, which is the leopard. The next one is the feet of a bear. So in this drawing, what we're looking at is you see that whoever drew this one up, it had the paws and the feet of a bear, which is the power All right. In fact, well, the teeth are pretty powerful too, but it uses its arms and its paws to rip and destroy his enemy. So it had the massiveness of the Persian and the bears in the lake. So this end-time beast that we're looking at in John's time has all of this incorporated into one. And it had the mouth of a lion. Remember, it spoke blasphemy and great sins. The greatness of the Babylonian Empire was the strongest part of the lion. All right, so that part is basically the head. That's the mouth. That's what's driving and speaking of what's going on there, and that is the lion. So what we're looking at when you read Revelation chapter 13 is actually the reconstituted information given to the prophecies in Daniel in chapter 2 and chapter 7. So we're looking at basically the same thing, all coming together now for one beast at the end time before the return of Jesus Christ. It's understood as the Holy Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was the greatest war-making machine the world had ever seen, who encompassed all the power and the cruelty of the previous kingdoms. Look what it says in Daniel 7:7. And after this I saw in my night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful, terrible, strong exceedingly, and it had a great iron teeth. It devoured and brake to pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now we're going to begin to get into, in the future, we'll be getting into talking about how these things come into play. Now remember, the church is taught, if you're new, let me give you the background. The church is always taught that the United Nations of Europe, the European power, the EU today, would be comprised of 10 controlling nations. It could have more than 10 nations, but it'll have 10 ruling nations who will control the power, and it's going to be dreadful beyond all belief. Now, just this week, Macron, president of France, said this: we cannot always go through the United States. No, we have to think of a European as well. He's talking about bringing nuclear power now into their control in Europe so that they can control things for themselves. And who's going to be running things? The Pope. Who's going to be directing and going through that with the Pope under his demand, his edicts? NATO and the EU. So while Macron believed that Europe required the ability to act independently, he felt nuclear issues needed to be managed in cooperation with NATO. Well, he said that because he has to. No one's going to let him do what he needed to do to bring in a nuclear power unless everybody is in agreement. He's trying to say, we're going to come in, we're going to do it, and we'll have your control with you and working with us and all the power that we need. So this is just a way to show you that everything is wrapping up to what the book of Daniel and Revelation tells us. All right, well, that's it. We're going to pick up more of that next week. So be back next week. Make sure you catch next week's program. All righty. Satan's plan, a counterfeit plan of deception. This is what we've been talking about now for weeks. Mardi Gras, we passed the Christmas season. This coming week, by the time you get this program, you're into Mardi Gras weekend big here. So if you haven't seen that sermon yet, make sure you get that sermon. Mardi Gras, the biblical mystery hiding in plain sight. And then we'll get into the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on mankind, Easter. These three is Satan's plan of deception. The counterfeit, the God's holy plan. Last week in the mail, being prepared spiritually by Bobby Weber, a minister right here in New Orleans. And we sent out the news nuggets and insights from January 24th of this year. So make sure if you're not on the mailing list, by all means, get on the mailing list. All right, that's it for our program. We're a little long. I think we're pretty close to 1 hour. So we're going to close with a video from last year. This was played in 2018. This is Caruso, and he's rescuing. This is the avalanche rescue. He's on his way. Let's play that video. We'll be right back. head over here. Over here. How could you not love Caruso? Well, get the kids, if they haven't seen it, back that tape up. Let them see Caruso back at work being a hero again. All right, well, that's it for our program this week. That's it. Thanks again from all of us here at God's Unchanging Word. Thanks for watching. Share it with all your friends. They're going to love you for it. Believe me, they're going to love you for it. Maybe not. Share it with them anyway. For next week, God be with you. Thank you for all your help, your prayers, and your support. For next week, God.